Who needs a miracle today? I see some hands. Sometimes we just find ourselves there, right? We find ourselves in a spot where we've tried everything. We've done everything we know to do, and nothing's worked. And we don't know where to turn sometimes. We get to a place where we don't know where else to go and where else to turn. And that's when we realize, I need a miracle. And I really do think that we have somewhat of a conflicted relationship with miracles within the Christian community. I think that we believe that God is able to do miracles. I don't think anybody would say that they don't believe that. But on the other hand, we seem to expect miracles very rarely. I don't feel like we are looking for miracles. I'm not sure that we're always wanting to believe that a miracle can happen for us. Or maybe we want to believe it, but we're afraid to believe it. But I do see that in much of the Christian world, although there, of course, is the opposite side of the spectrum, maybe the more Pentecostal churches and circles where it sometimes seems like they're actually manufacturing miracles. And so I see this kind of conflict that we have with the subject, but I want you to know that I do very much believe that far from miracles being something that is consigned to the distant past, that God still intervenes in the lives of his people. And even in the lives of sometimes those who are not yet his people, that he intervenes in powerful ways. And I've put together this 4-week teaching series that I'm beginning today to talk about this incredibly important subject, because what I want to do is I want to increase our faith, to believe God for the miracle that we need, whatever type of miracle that might be that you might need. In Mark chapter 11, have faith in God, Jesus said. Have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. All right, so the issue that Jesus raises here in these verses is not whether we believe in God or not, but whether we believe that God is willing to come to our aid in big ways, in powerful ways, sometimes miraculous ways. And Jesus clearly wants us to understand and to have confidence in the fact that faith in God makes the impossible possible. Faith in God makes the impossible possible. Now, in my own experience, I have seen miracles throughout my lifetime. I have personally experienced miracles myself. And yet, I haven't found miracles to be commonplace. At least not the kind of miracles that Jesus is describing here in this text. I mean, in one sense, life itself is a miracle, right? I mean, the very fact that the universe exists is a miracle. Every breath we take, every organ in the human body is a miracle. Every baby that's born is a miracle. I mean, the fact that we are sitting here on this giant ball of rock that's rotating at 1,000 miles per hour while simultaneously flying through space at 67,000 miles per hour, and none of us are falling off, is a miracle in and of itself. All right? But on top of all of that, on top of all of the everyday miracles that we experience and see around us, Jesus throws down an expectation in this text that prayer, when offered in faith, is able to produce supernatural phenomena. And that raises the question for us then maybe, why are we not experiencing more miracles? Why are we not seeing more miracles happen? Is it because God is pulling back? Is it because God is no longer as involved in his world as he once was? Or is it because we're not asking for miracles, or we're not believing that what we ask for will be done. And that's the quandary, I think, that we find ourselves in. And maybe you, at some point in your life, have prayed for a miracle. Maybe you prayed in the past for something that was really important to you, and you didn't get the miracle that you asked for. It didn't happen that time. And so now you're kind of in this place that you assume that because the miracle you prayed for so hard didn't happen, that miracles don't happen, period. Or that it's not going to happen for you in the future if you were to ask for a miracle. And so we then, when we have that experience, we kind of dial back and we kind of reduce what we anticipate from God. And so I'm going to get to a couple of reasons why we don't always get the miracle that we ask for a little bit later here, but I don't think that's where we need to start. That's not where Jesus starts. See, nowhere in the 4 Gospels that record the life and ministry and teachings of Jesus, nowhere in the Gospels do you ever find Jesus telling his disciples that they should temper their expectations of God and prayer. Like, nowhere do you see it. Jesus never says something to the effect of, you know, guys, when you pray, don't get your hopes up too high. I just want you to know, like, sometimes God may have a different plan than what you're asking for. Jesus never says that. Those are the things we say. Jesus doesn't say that. Now, I do think there is some validity to that, okay? But that's not what Jesus said. It's not the point that he emphasized. Every time Jesus spoke about prayer, every time Jesus spoke about the possibility of the miraculous, the point he always made was the power of faith. He always talked about the fact that faith in God makes the impossible possible. And I think that that's because he knows, he's so very well aware that we have difficulty sometimes believing for a miracle. He knows that. But prayer that's offered in faith can, in fact, bring on a miracle. And that's what Jesus wants us to believe. That's what Jesus wants us to expect, in fact. And so that's where we need to start. Now, I think often we're afraid to ask for the miracle. We'll ask for the surgery to be successful. We'll ask for the medicine to work. We'll ask for the therapy to be effective. We may ask that God just gives us the strength to endure whatever the situation is. But we often just kind of seem hesitant to actually pray bold prayers that God would do something supernatural in our health or in the health of someone else or in some other situation. And so, it's not surprising, I think, at all that when we open the Bible and we read the teachings of Jesus, that he emphasizes what he does and that he repeatedly calls us back to a greater faith. Like Jesus says, have faith in God. Have faith. Like, pray for mountains to be moved. Believe that they will. And then sit back and watch what God does. That's the kind of thing Jesus says. And that was his consistent message. That's not just one little thing I cherry-picked out of the Gospels. I challenge you to read them for yourself. And you'll find that kind of teaching from Jesus consistently when he talks about prayer, when he talks about miracles. And he gives that kind of promise not to just anyone, mind you, but to those who follow him. And for the last 7 weeks, we just got through talking about what does it mean to follow Jesus. And so he gives these promises to people who are devoted to him. So today, I want to talk about a certain type of miracle that sometimes we find ourselves needing, and that is miracles of healing. Maybe today you need a miracle of healing. And maybe you have been through the ringer with your health. Maybe you have been to doctor after doctor after doctor. Maybe you have tried all kinds of medications that haven't worked. Maybe you had the surgery. Maybe you've been to therapy. And yet, after all of that, you're still suffering. And you're wondering, where can I turn now? Maybe you've even given up. Maybe you've given up hope of even any potential for healing to happen for you. Maybe you've resigned yourself to the fact that this is just going to be my lot in life, to deal with whatever this condition is. But before you jump to that conclusion too quickly, I really want to ask you, before you decide, just because modern medicine has failed you and hasn't been able to help you, have you asked God for a miracle? Have you asked God in faith? Do you believe? Do you have faith to believe that God is able to make the impossible possible? Have you asked for someone else to pray for a miracle for you? Because throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus performing miracles of healing on multiple occasions and healing all kinds of different illnesses and conditions. And on many of those occasions that we read about in the Gospels, there's a spotlight that is put on the faith that is involved in the request. There's faith on the part of this person who's asking. So let's look at a few examples. Matthew chapter 8, we're going to kind of stay in Matthew today. Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 5, tells us that when Jesus had entered a town called Capernaum, that a centurion came to him. So this is a pagan Roman asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. And Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? I want you just to notice right there, Jesus' willingness. You notice the centurion doesn't have to beg him. Jesus is like, would you like me to heal him? He's offering. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. But what? What does he say? Just say the word. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. And upon that, Jesus, Matthew tells us, turned to the disciples and remarked about how great this man's faith was. And then in verse 13, it says that Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that moment. What if faith actually influences our lives? What if what we believe actually affects what happens? What if it will be done for me just as I believe it will? What could happen if I were to exercise my faith, if I were to stretch my faith and pray bolder prayers? What could happen? And if you turn the page in your Bible, if you're looking in your Bible to Matthew chapter 9, verse 20 brings up another incident, this one involving a woman. It says, just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. 12 years is a long time to be dealing with an illness or some kind of physical malady. I mean, that is a long time. That's as long as Thaddeus has been in school. He was in kindergarten 12 years ago. That's a long time to be sick. That is the definition of a chronic illness. After 12 years of dealing with an illness or a condition, would you be resigned to the fact that this was just going to be the way it is for you? Would you have given up all hope after 12 years that God might heal you? No. This woman didn't. She had heard about Jesus, and she had heard about his power to heal people physically. And not only did she hear about it, but she believed it. And she believed enough that she was willing to come find him and work her way through this big crowd of people that Matthew tells us was surrounding him at the time. And not only that, but there's something else that really stuck out to me in this particular incident, is that she didn't just hope that he might heal her. She was confident that if she could just touch him, even his cloak, even the clothes he was wearing, that she would be healed. She had a confidence in that. And then verse 22 says that Jesus turned and he saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. What has healed you? Your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed at that moment. You know, she had tried so hard to be inconspicuous, so hard to be unnoticed. She was clearly an outcast from society because of her condition. And she was trying not to attract attention. And yet, because she felt so unworthy and she felt so invisible to the community, Jesus, he turns and he looks at her. And in the text, Matthew says he saw her. Like, he gives her the gift of attention. He gives her the gift of being seen and valued. He knows that her heart needs healing as much as anything else does. And so he attends to that. He attends to her self-image, as well as giving her the gift of healing for her body. And again, he emphasizes it was her faith that made the impossible possible. It was a 12-year chronic condition, gone in a moment. That's pretty amazing. And then following Matthew's account just a little further, verse 27 of chapter 9 says that as Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him. And these blind men are calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And when he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I am" what? Able to do this. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? "Yes, Lord," they replied. You know, blindness is typically a pretty permanent condition. And I just wonder if you are suffering right now with some kind of illness or some kind of condition that the doctors have told you is incurable. Do you have faith that God is able to make the impossible possible? Do you believe? They did. And verse 29 says, "Then he touched their eyes and said, according to" what? "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. So again, faith is the catalyst to God's intervention in our lives, in big situations, in very difficult situations, even in impossible situations. Our lives follow our beliefs. Our lives follow our beliefs. And so when you and I, when we believe what Jesus can do, then it opens up the possibility for a miraculous thing to happen, for a miraculous healing to come, even in those situations where the medical community is powerless to help us. Faith in God makes the impossible possible. Faith can heal our bodies, it can heal our hearts, it can heal our souls. Faith can move the mountains that are in our way. And as we read these historical accounts in the Gospels of these individuals who experienced miracles of healing, there are, of course, so many more than what we're looking at this morning. We, I think, should have a tremendous hope for what God may do in our lives. But maybe you're still thinking about that experience of the past where you prayed for healing and it didn't come. And maybe it was for you, or maybe it was for somebody else that you prayed for. You prayed so earnestly and the healing didn't come, and maybe, again, that's what's hanging you up. And I think that's where we get stuck. So what we don't want to do when it comes to this issue is we don't want to fall off either of two cliffs that we could fall off. Okay, so one cliff is where we believe that God will always heal us if we just have enough faith. Okay, that's a cliff that we could fall off. If we think that God will always, 100% of the time, bring the miracle and do the healing if we just believe enough. Because if you believe that, then when it doesn't happen, when the miracle doesn't come, then you're forced to conclude that either God doesn't exist or doesn't do miracles, or you're going to beat yourself up, or you're going to beat up the person that you were praying for who was sick, believing that you just didn't have enough faith. That was the problem. And so that's a cliff that we don't want to fall off of. But the other cliff we could fall off of is where we are too resigned. Like we are just failing to expect that God is going to do a miracle at all. And so that's where we just kind of feel like it's better to kind of keep our expectations low so that we or the person we're praying for don't get disappointed by God if he doesn't come through with the miracle we're asking for. And so there's actually very little faith in our prayer. And that's, I think, a cliff that we certainly don't want to fall off of either. And I think if we tend to lean more one direction than the other, I think that we tend to lean more towards not having enough faith rather than having too much faith. And so I think we're much more likely to see prayer as a last resort than we are to see it as our first go-to response when there's a problem, when there's a need, or in this case, when we're sick or someone we know is sick. And so I think that's why Jesus, again, this is why Jesus consistently emphasized the importance of faith and the power of faith and raised the bar on our expectations of what God is both able and willing to do. And so if you take Jesus's teachings and Jesus's point of emphasis as any indication, the number one reason we aren't experiencing more miracles is that our expectations are too low, not too high. And so we've got to change that. That's where we've got to start. That's where we need to really focus. All right? Now, having said that, the scriptures do show us, and personal experience tells us, that there are times when no matter how much faith we pray with, that we don't get the miracle, or we don't get the miracle we wanted. 19-year-old Josh Hunt he's a son of a dear friend of mine. He has been experiencing very unusual and long-term and severe problems with his legs. 19-year-old kid, he's an athlete. And not only an athlete, but a multiple sport athlete. Someone who loves sports, and he's really good at each of the sports that he plays. But this has been a problem that has plagued him throughout his teenage years. And the symptoms baffled the doctors for quite some time. For a good long while, they were just grasping at straws, trying to figure out what in the world was wrong with him. First they thought it was this, then they thought it was that, and they thought it was something else. But eventually, through many doctors, the specialists were finally able to pinpoint what the problem is for him. And yet, it turns out there's no easy fix. And he has had times that he was confined to being on crutches. They even put him in a wheelchair for an extended period of time. He has been on all kinds of different medications. He's still on long-term therapy, physical therapy. And he has gradually and incrementally improved over time. But the problem still isn't gone. And meanwhile, hundreds and hundreds of prayers have been offered up for Josh. By his parents, by me, by others, many others who know him and his family. And the prayers have gone up, but the miracle has not yet come. But, at a recent church retreat that just happened a couple of weeks ago, Josh was there, and he opened up to the participants who were there at this retreat. I think all of them were older than him. But he opened up and he shared how that while he still longs for a full healing, and he's still praying for and hoping that God will bring the miracle of the full healing, that he also recognizes that had it not been for this problem that he's been dealing with for these several years now, that he would not be as close to God as he is today. Now, for a 19-year-old athlete boy to have that kind of perspective is a miracle in and of itself. It really is. See, sometimes the miracle comes in a different form. God can heal our bodies and often does heal our bodies, but his best work sometimes is healing our hearts. Sometimes his best work is in our minds and hearts and souls. And there are some things that God cannot show us without taking us through something hard, without us going through some suffering. There are some deep experiences of God that we will never have until we go through the refining fires of something really painful in our lives that causes us to realize that God is really all we need. So, the Apostle Paul also had an experience like that. You're probably very familiar with the Apostle Paul. He had some incredible mountaintop experiences spiritually with God. He had seen amazing things. He himself had worked miracles. And yet in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 7, he says, "Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me." Now, there are some strong indications as you read the New Testament that Paul his eyesight was beginning to fail. And so that may be what he's referring to here, but it may have been another problem entirely that he was thinking of. But whatever it was that he refers to here as this thorn in his flesh was clearly causing him a lot of grief. In verse 8, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. So he asked for the miracle. And he asked repeatedly for the miracle. And he was a man of tremendous faith. So there's no doubt that he was asking in faith. Verse 9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in" what? In weakness. Isn't that interesting? So God spoke to Paul's heart about this, that there was actually a purpose to his pain. That there was something that God wanted to do through this, and that only through Paul actually coming to realize his own weakness could he then learn to truly and fully rely on God's strength. That only when he was able to see past his own limitations, would he then be able to see what God alone could truly do. And so Paul concludes, "Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly" about what? My weaknesses. That's an unusual thing to say. I'll boast about my weaknesses. Why? So that Christ's power may rest on me. Paul is realizing, I am now experiencing Christ's power in a way that I never did before, because I'm having to rely more on him and less on myself. So sometimes God's power is best displayed when we actually endure suffering rather than escape suffering. That is a fact. But even then, it's faith that gives us the ability to actually go through that suffering, go through that illness, and come out victorious, and come out with our spirit unbroken, and our hearts even more tender, and our relationship with Jesus that much deeper, and our hope for heaven that much more real. It's faith. And that is often the bigger miracle. It's actually often the greater testimony to a fellow sufferer. And so we aren't going to fall off the cliff of the health and wealth gospel that teaches that God will always heal you if you just have enough faith. We're going to avoid that cliff. But at the same time, we are going to listen to Jesus, right? We're going to listen to Jesus. We're going to pay attention to what he says and to his point of emphasis and to all the examples that we have in the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament of miracles that happen not only during Jesus' own life and ministry, but also in the early church after he had returned to heaven. There's many instances of miraculous healings in the book of Acts. Once Jesus was gone and it was just his early church growing and becoming what it would become. And even in the letters of the New Testament, there are references to some miraculous healings that took place. So may it never be that we fail to experience God's healing power, either personally or see it happen in the life of somebody we know and care about, because we simply lacked the faith to ask for the miracle. Matthew chapter 20, 2 other blind men sitting by the roadside. When they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to what? Be quiet, right, be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Listen, don't ever let anyone shut you up when you are crying out to God. You know, when you need help from God, don't let anybody tell you not to. Okay? Don't let anybody tell you, hey, you should just accept that that's going to be your lot in life. Unless you've heard that from God himself, like Paul did. Verse 32, Jesus stopped. He stopped, dead in his tracks. He completely diverted his attention from what he was on his way to do. And he called them over. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. Now that is an important question, guys. That is an incredible invitation, really. Jesus wants us to come to him with our honest requests. He wants us to tell him what we truly hope for. He wants us to search our hearts and come to him with what we really, truly hope for and want and ask. Verse 33, "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." All right, so there it is. There's the request. They make it. They make the request. They ask for the miracle. And that was a bold prayer, wouldn't you say? We want our sight. That's a bold prayer. But they needed the miracle, and they asked for one. And verse 34 says that Jesus had compassion on them, and he touched their eyes. And the parallel accounts of this particular event in Mark and Luke add that Jesus said to them, "Go, your faith has healed you." So again, the emphasis on the faith factor. And immediately, Matthew says, they received their sight and followed him. So they asked for the miracle, and they got the miracle. So maybe, guys, sometimes we are too quick to pray, "God, let your will be done in this situation." Before we've ever really come to him with our honest, heartfelt requests and told him what we really hope for and what we really want. Miracles of healing require us to ask for one. They require us to ask for one. And so if we want God to heal us, or if we want God to heal someone else that we love, we need to unashamedly, with all the faith we can muster, come to him and ask. Right? And I'm not suggesting that we should not seek medical help. And we have medical personnel right here in our church. We highly value the medical profession. We highly value modern medicine. It's been a tremendous blessing to us that God has given us. And so certainly we want to utilize that. when it's available to us and when it can help us. But while we value modern medicine, and God often does work through it to bring healing, do we have the faith to ask God for his direct, miraculous healing touch? See, in a minute, we're going to give you the opportunity to do just that. In a minute, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask for healing. For yourself, for someone else, whatever is the need that's in your life, whether it's physical healing, whether it's mental healing, psychological, whether it's emotional healing that you need, whatever kind of healing that you need, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask for it, to ask God. James chapter 5, verse 14 and 15 says, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord." That's the power of intercessory prayer. Not just praying yourself, but asking for someone else to pray for you. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up, and if they have sinned, they will be forgiven. See, spiritual healing is even more important. Sometimes it's required before the other types of healing can happen. 100% of us in here are going to eventually die. Unless Jesus comes first. But so that what that means is physical healing is always temporary. Spiritual healing, on the other hand, is forever. Verse 16, therefore, he says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be what? Healed. That's the promise. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective, James tells us. Believe that. Believe that what God says through his word is true. And so the next step is, if you have a need, ask and believe God for the miracle that you need. Just don't hold back. Whether it's for you or someone else, take your true heart request to him. Tell him what it is that you want. Tell him what it is that you're hoping for and praying for. And be bold in your faith. Be bold. Listen to what Jesus has said. Let your faith rise up. Rebuke your doubts. Embrace your faith. Our prayer team partners are going to go ahead and make their way now they already are making their way now to their positions around the room. So we have 2 up there and 2 down here. And you can come to any of us. We would love to pray for you today. We would love to honor what we just read in James chapter 5 and pray for you, pray with you, pray over you. We would love to anoint you with oil today in the name of the Lord, that you might be healed or your loved one might be healed. If you need to confess sin, you can come and do that and receive forgiveness from God. But let's pray together for the miracle that you need. So this is your opportunity now. We're going to be here to receive you for prayer.